Hello, and welcome to the Man Down podcast. My name's Ted Knutson. I'm joined by Patrick Van Straten. Hello, Patrick.
I say
We,
Stratton, but you can say Stratton. You're an American.
yeah, it's an A. It could be a nasal A. We are here to wreak havoc on male lives in the best possible way. That's what we're gonna do. If you're up for it, and you should be up for it because you need it, you need it. We're gonna talk about today about sex. This is our first one. We're talking about sex. I'm sure we will talk about sex pretty regularly. If you are a family member of mine, you are not allowed to watch this. Please shut this off right now. Off you go. Don't do it. Not a thing for you to be involved with. Everybody else, you're good. I'm going to talk about things that are interesting and potentially uncomfortable to me, but ones that, aren't embarrassing to anyone else but myself. And also lots of things that I have learned coming back into the world where the last time that I was in a long-term relationship, we didn't have smartphones. There was no apps. Like porn was sort of pretty nascent on the internet. And then when I came back out and started dating again, it was like, oh my God, everything has changed. So Patrick's probably going to ask me some questions about that. We're going to talk about some interesting trends and things that we've discovered along the way. And I hope that you enjoy today's episode. All right, Patrick, here we go. This is, I think we've been entertained by the idea of this episode since it started. And now that we're in it, I'm slightly horrified because, you're not the person that is intending to be super vulnerable about this stuff.
No.
Although, no,
Not at all. This is going to be our monthly Ted reads from his sex journal podcast episode.
You say sex journal. I will say that there is an iconic internet post about this woman named Ella Girl's gangbang, birthday gangbang. Sure. We're not going to talk about things like that in general.
How far in do we say the word gangbang? Can I just get a time code check?
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes gangbang. There we go.
So there's an iconic data visualization of this that is a Sankey chart, and there's one particular end of the data visualization that says Cayman Fluffer. The reason why I mentioned this is because I am very data oriented and in my whole life, and my career has been that. And I've made a bunch of money for being data oriented. Nothing to do with coming in fluffers. But the point of this is that I don't keep sex journals or track anything about that. But the other point is I have almost a perfect memory. So unfortunately, I still remember lots of stuff.
Okay, well, yeah, but that's fine. That's less creepy. It's okay to remember stuff. Whereas if you've got, a clicker, like one in, one out kind of system, then that is a bit of a concern, I would say. So where do you want to start this then? Because, we were talking about this and there are a million angles that we could take on sex. But like you say, this is our first sex episode. So what feels like an obvious way in?
I think one of the ways that we had discussed previously was that talking about how things had changed and what I have learned, but also what I'm still learning from the internet and from people's studies is another thing too, which is Ella Girl is very useful. She's very controversial. For those of you who haven't encountered her before, she is a former sex worker, but also rationalist, and she has many controversial opinions. But one of the greatest things that she's done is she's built this website where she will do these massive Twitter polls and surveys, and hundreds of thousands of people will come to fill these things in. And if you take them as mostly valid, she has the biggest sample size of people's sexual behavior and kinks and fetishes and just how they think about world and relationship in general of anybody. And it might be skewed because people that are interested in Ella are not necessarily fully representative of the whole population, but at a certain sample size, you're like, that's a lot of people. And so it's a really intriguing look on, how at least some significant amount of people look at sex. Now, this will change based off of your religion and your sexuality and where you grew up. In some cases, like, your different cultural approaches to sex are significant. And I think in my lifetime, we've seen a number of different changes in people's approach to sex. You get like it was before I was born, but you get the summer of love where like, money or sex money or sex, love, free drugs, right? That was sex, love, drugs. That was like way back when. You get the uprise of feminism, which then has had some backlash against it in different cultures. Like feminism still doesn't exist. Women are certainly relegated there, and that will obviously have a huge difference in how people approach their sexual lives. And then obviously we're Western culture, and particularly sort of Western Europe and also the United States. United States is different because lots of religious culture inside of that tends to anchor. I have it's a big set of changes, and right now is
Yeah.
obviously the most wild west that we've ever seen for people that are kind of like activated on the internet. Yeah, so go ahead. Like I'm gonna be a somewhat open book. I will cut off any particular references to people that might be obvious. But no, I think it's how often do people talk openly about sex and the male side of it? And in a way that is affectionate and warm and curious,
Yeah, that's the issue.
love women, like
Mhm.
not anti-women, not use women, but like genuinely love women and have great long relationships with them and happy to be a great sexual partner as well as a great romantic partner and life partner.
Well, and I think as well where you're willing to acknowledge the soft boundaries. You know, obviously when you're growing up thinking about sexuality, you want to think in terms of hard categories. And I think that was probably true for you growing up where you were in the US. And I grew up in a very religious household. So it was felt that there were these really hard categories. And as you get older, you of course realize that desire is very plastic and that you can be attracted to people rather than, genders or whatever it might be.
Can you define plastic for me? Because like that is a thing that I think not everybody has a definition for because it's something you encounter at different times. But so you say desire is plastic. What does that mean?
I mean that it's moldable, that it can be shaped. And obviously that means that it can be remolded as well. Like that's literally kind of like the Greek origin of it, right? But when we're talking about neuroplasticity, we are kind of talking about neuroflexibility, right?
Mm.
We're talking about the ability to change the pathways in your brain. And similarly, I think that's true with desire. Desire can it does naturally alter as you get older, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. It can be changed based on circumstances. It can be changed based on well, circumstances as in the culture you grow up in, but also the people that you're dating, the people that you meet. All these things can push you in a particular direction or broaden your perspective on what is attractive to you. I guess an obvious place is the reason that we are talking about your sex life is that you are back in the game, not on the game, back in the game after a period out, period, shall we say? I don't know. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, I'll try and keep this concise. So I got married very young. I was still 20, I think, when we got married to a woman who's wonderful. Eventually realized that she was a lesbian and now lives in San Francisco. And I'm not, I'm hetero, but I'm very supportive of LGBTQ plus causes. And then I met my second wife shortly thereafter, and we had a lovely long relationship for about 15 years. And then that came to a conclusion a couple of years ago. And since then, I came back into the world as a single man who had had two very normal and normie long relationships. And then I was like, oh. And to some extent, given where I grew up and how my relationships have been, they were I had a good sex life in my marriages. Don't That's not a thing. But it was a little bit like Donald Glover walking into into Parks and
Mm,
Rec and everything was on fire, and you're like, wow, this is
yeah.
what the world's like now,
Mhm.
since the world has been exposed to porn since since a very young age.
So you got kind of deposited in your 40s, like as somebody who had spent pretty much your entire adult life in monogamous relationships, and presumably then having to sort of wrestle with stuff that maybe had been kind of fossilized in there before the first marriage. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that I watch porn. I think all men watch porn. Most people watch porn. Porn has changed fucking massive amounts since since the early days here. You used
Yeah.
to just have magazines that you found like, in in your dad's or your uncle's garage and you're like, "Oh, wow, look at this." And nowadays like literally everything is available on the internet, but also like many of the people who are making tons of money off of it are women who are not exploited but choosing to as a way to create freedom, money, expression as well. So yes, watched porn, some experience in that, but they come back into the world. And I had a number of questions that I thought were kind of the right approach for this. And I'm not sure that it was, but it was my approach. So there you go. The first one was I had to start dating people to figure out like what am I even interested in now? Because I was in relationships for 20 plus years. Like how have things changed? I'm not sure. How have I changed? The story, a man never steps in the same river twice. I'm a completely different person than I would have been in my 20s, or even, at the start of my 30s when my last marriage started. And so that is a huge thing to kind of go and explore. And not only have I changed somewhat, but like the next question was, what's on offer out there? Like, what are people even like? And that was really kind of what blew my mind.
So as you were saying before, obviously we've had waves of sexual liberation, but it does feel that in the last 20 years we've sort of passed the knee of the curve, as it were, and a large proportion of liberation has been done, and now the field has rapidly expanded. So
This is absolutely Rip Van fucking Winkle walks
yeah,
back into
exactly.
some sex life 15 years later.
Oh god. Okay, so what were you most confronted by? What was the thing that really took you aback when you started getting back into dating, into having an active sex life with new people?
So I had maybe a small slutty period when I first went to university. Dated a bunch of people in my first year, but knew my first wife in my first year. We were really good friends, and then ended up starting a relationship with her. Effectively writing love letters back and forth in the summer of before our sophomore year, and then with my next wife, we also knew each other. And so you're exposed to dating apps, and dating apps is like, as a 40-plus-year-old man, like, fucking dating apps are miserable. They are the worst. Like, how do I even get noticed? I'm somebody that understands marketing, and you're like, okay, this is really difficult. And we'll talk a lot. We'll have full episodes, multiple episodes on dating apps. But obviously, coming out of a marriage, you're like very interested in having sex. So like, how do I figure this out? Quite challenging, and not always that successful. But the broader point is that in my early iterations, like, these were natural interactions, and they happened organically from people around my life. And now, in order to do this and to some extent speedrun everything, uh, I throw myself into things that I'm very interested in, and relationships and sex. Obviously, most men are very interested in. So I was like, okay, well, I need to figure out how to go on lots of dates, and so that was the first challenge. But then the way that I work as a person is, and the way that I think most men probably should work, is like, how do I create affection and moments of warmth that then lead to other things, right? Because this is the whole process. This is a process oriented thing, because it actually is a process. Like, you can't, especially for women, like, you can't just toss them into a sexual situation for the most part and then them be like, yay. Like, for men, it happens immediately, right? You see something visual and you're like, yes, I'm interested in sex. And
It's
for
more
women,
mechanical.
yes, exactly. And for women, like, there's often, like, a whole buildup that's really important. Men forget this because it's not for them. Right. And so, like, I suspect male to male relationships are significantly different in how they happen than men to women. So, coming back to this, like, my biggest question is like, what are people interested in now? And that was also, I think, the one where we've got some learnings that we're kind of sharing, and maybe we can bring them up as some slides as we do the post edit here. So two things that I wanted to kind of discuss on this. One, I think you're going to have an opinion on. So there's this classic bit of data analysis that happened a few years back, and I think Hannah Fry has her own commentary on this. That's one of the more popular ones. Fry R squared. She's really interesting. It is anonymous survey of men and women. At what age do you find the opposite sex most physically attractive? And for women, it's a relatively linear plot where, like, within a few years of their actual age, maybe a few years younger, they find men most sexually attractive. So say you're like a 35-year-old woman, you're like, maybe 32, and it kind of scales all the way up to 40. So women are relatively close to their own age, plus or minus a few years. For men, this plot is basically a vertical line. From
Hmm.
age 20 to age 50, men find women that are 20 to 24 years old the most physically attractive, over and over and over again. Now, here's the thing: women think that this is gross. Women are like, that's disgusting. Men are disgusting. And actually, our podcast producer said the same thing, like, men are gross. This is wiring. This is not men are gross. This is like, are you gay? Yes, I am gay because I am wired to be gay, right? Like, you can choose. Sexuality is a spectrum, but for some people, it's just like, I am gay, right? Because that is how their mind and their body and whatever works. For men answering anonymously, there's no social repercussions to this. No one's fucking judging you. We answered all the same thing. That is wiring. And that wiring is largely caused by the the way that we're built to reproduce, right? Men can reproduce over and over and over again, all the way up through their lives. Charlie Chaplin had his last child at 72, right? So like we can be very successful at reproducing, and we are built to reproduce. In this circumstance, it's no one's judging you. We're just fucking wired badly. And I'm not saying you should date 20-year-olds. In fact, I'm saying I would tell you do not date 20-year-olds.
don't do
That's a
that.
very bad idea. Like well, like I've not dated 20-year-olds, but I've dated some people slightly older than that, because coming back into the world, you're like, well, if I have the opportunity to go out with somebody that's really physically attractive, maybe I should do that. And women are like, you're gross. I'm like, fine, I get it, but this is for science. so
That's big of you.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And when there were two of us, it was big of them too. Big of you, big of me, big of everybody. Wait,
Oh my God.
no, sorry. That's a Marx Brothers joke. Long time. Love that.
Well, we've already gone through When Harry Met Sally and Heraclitus. You've already quoted. You're all over the quotes today. Okay, so is there more you want to say before we talk about this chart, or?
No, so this is my take. Like, this is pure wiring. Men are not gross. We're just fucking built like this, and we don't have a choice as to how we have responses to physically attractive. You have significant choices as to what you actually pursue and what you want to have relationships with. But in this particular case, like, we've been overridden. It's not a thoughtful thing. It is this is what you feel, or this is what you respond as.
I mean, I have some issues with,
Of course you do.
the chart.
I know.
Well, my first issue is that I look at it and I'm kind of like, why do 45-year-olds say 24, but 46-year-olds say 20?
There's some data drift. It's fine.
Yeah, but I think that's quite significant. And also I think just saying an age, like, that's not necessarily as good as you want it to be. You want it to be like,
I think the survey is
actually pictures, right?
Sure, I think the survey is actually pictures. I think the survey is actually robust. So,
okay, good.
So if you come back to you say these are the things that look most attractive, the women of particular ages that look most physically attractive. You use a large sample and consistency. If I had many more millions, maybe we would reproduce this in that type of survey, but we don't right now. We're just on a podcast.
Yeah, in a couple of years' time. Okay, so an interesting thing about it, though, I guess, is that I'm always a bit wary of us just attributing stuff to biology and saying it's just the way it is.
Same.
Because I do think these things can be significantly reshaped, as I kind of said before. We also all clearly have unconventional types. There are gay people. Some of us are into people who are not kind of biologically optimal, right? We only assume fertility to a certain point, which is less true than it's ever been. Women are bearing children later. Some men, you probably have some friends who are attracted to women who are probably too thin to menstruate, for example. That's another like anti-biological impulse there. The way that we perceive thinness, fatness, all those kinds of things, they change from culture to culture. But yeah, obviously this is a real thing. What I would be interested in is the strength of this. So what age do you find most attractive? Well, it might be 20, but how much more attractive do you find 20-year-olds than 30-year-olds? It might be only a very, very, very small fraction, right?
That's a great upgrade in the survey. Like, how relative is this, and how flexible is that element as well? I don't disagree with that at all. Speaking of being able to get pregnant, do you know that from age 34 onward, they call it a geriatric pregnancy? Man, like, which biologist decided to just go fucking offensive?
I think it's only if you deliver once. If you deliver at 35, or might be 36,
geriatric.
Then it's geriatric.
I feel like it's 65. These are people that are retired and on pension. but I guess in the life cycle of things for women in particular, then it is there. Like, they're on the end of that reproductive life cycle.
Yeah, with our second child, my wife was like, "I need to get this in before I'm officially a geriatric mother."
No, she said you need to get it in before.
I just don't.
Wait.
Well,
sorry.
Okay. That's enough of that. Jesus Christ. Okay, so the chart is interesting. So yes, there is this biological imperative. Like, at the same time, it clearly doesn't function for everyone, and it's probably not so strong that it governs everything about us.
Correct.
It's a kind of base thing going on in the background, I would say.
But there's this trope of older men that, desperately want to date younger women and see what their sex life looks like, this, that, and the other thing. I have been around men like that, as well as having dated some younger women. And I can tell you almost universally, you do not want to live that life. And this is the thing. So I think in the start, when we first started discussing building this podcast, I linked the Solomon, Missouri thread that was basically about Steph Curry's dad when he was getting divorced and going back out into the dating world. My friends link this back to me at least like twice a year. They're like, should I ever go to Tulum? Like that will be part of the thing. Charcoal activated stuff. They pagan out here is the thing that it's also there. So people's sex life and what they're aware of and what their kinks might be has radically changed so fantastically versus the olden days. And you used to have to go out of your way, or you used to have to watch Caligula in order
Sure.
to find like the filthiest shit. And now the filthiest stuff is just there. It's just there and everybody knows about it and whatever. And the thing is, I'm saying the words filthiest, but I'm not kink shaming anybody. In fact, like I'm open to what people are open and interested in. And that was the way that I had to approach stuff. And I found much of it like really surprising and unexpected from somebody who's pretty well read and pretty interested in these topics basically since puberty, been really interested in sex and everything else that has to go along with it. But I think that I was really surprised by some of the experiences that I had, and then in many cases, the data then comes back out after the fact. Or I learned about these studies after the fact that followed that up, and so there's a wide variety and diversity of things. But people are just so much more aware of their kinks and willing to talk about it within the first couple of dates.
It makes sense to do some of this stuff if it's deal breakery stuff, or if you think that it's going to become important quite quickly. So if you think that you're going to have sex quite early on, then it makes sense to talk about the kind of sex that you want to have.
Almost everybody has sex quite early on, is what I've learned.
Really? When
Yeah,
you say early on, what are we talking? First couple of dates?
yeah.
Okay.
Like usually like two to four. Like sometimes in the first one, like sometimes you just have great chemistry, but often 2 to 4. And I think the reason why is the time factor. So like people, time is the most valuable resource in your life. Men, like whether you know this or not, time is the most valuable resource in your life. And as you get older and you see that the sand is slipping through the hourglass, like you just realize that, oh my God, I have so much less time than I ever thought. And anytime that you're not fucking getting stuff done, if you're like lazing around, your old ass is going to be so angry at your young ass for like not being at least a little more productive about stuff. And so what I think, the apps in particular have done two things. One, they've helped people filter dramatically. In fact, way too much in most cases. Like people, like you look at the women on Instagram and TikTok, and they're like, "Oh, I've got the list, and this is the list of the icks, and my man must have these things, and these are all the mandatory things." And they try and find people that fit these things exactly. And if your list is more than like a couple of things long, like you're just finding ways to discount partners that are unacceptable to you for no reason whatsoever, other than you have this mental image that no one is ever going to fulfill. But it does help you find people that you're interested in. So like, younger women can find older men that they find attractive just by putting a filter on, or the other way around. They find people that are a height level. That height level is fucking plumbing too. Like we could talk about the wiring around that, but that's a big deal. And that fits back in with the other stuff around. We should talk about the height thing as wiring. We should also talk a little bit about the submissive thing, which took me completely by surprise. So if we can bring up the stuff on screen, and we will in a bit, there were two elements of this that Aella did in the N is 640,000 in her sample size. So it's
Wowza.
it's like the biggest ever. And she profiles by male and female, cis and not cis. And women that are at least slightly submissive, basically 90%, men 66%, extremely submissive, 40% for women, 18.6% for men, not cis 44%, but men were more likely to be submissive if they were not cis, which also really interesting. And then the dominant side. So men at least slightly dominant, 77%. So less, like significantly less, about 13% less than women being submissive, at least slightly. And then dominant extremely, like 24%. Then there's this other bit that's like non-consensual sex, which I think is like much deeper seated type stuff that I'm not super
Sure.
comfortable talking about right now. We actually may have some people on in the future to talk about it because they also have really interesting thoughts about it. But that submissive thing I found like totally surprising, because my brain was wired for the feminine revolution. And so like women that are now liberal and open, independent, and all these things. And I think that there is some of that. It's great. And I've been with wonderful, independent, incredibly smart, fabulous women. But the submissive thing doesn't go away. And one of the reasons why the height profile is such a big deal is because for something like 40% of the population, they need to feel at least a little bit either threatened or intimidated by the size of their man. And it's not like you're not being aggressive or anything like that. It's just a thing where like it's perceptual. Like, oh, he's big enough to make me a bit submissive. I found that like it blew my mind, and it blew my mind a number of times. And so this is the data side of it. Do you have any comments on that before I talk to you about the anecdotal side of it?
I don't know if I'd necessarily link the height and the submissive thing together, because I think, saying that you like to be a little bit submissive is not necessarily you want to feel it at all times. It's like you sometimes want to feel it in particular sexual interactions. I agree that, height could come into it, but so could
Correlation,
build.
not causation.
But then, when we're looking at over 50% of non-cis, what was it, non-cis male respondents,
Yeah.
then height starts to operate differently. What's interesting to me about it is that difference between cis and non-cis, because what it implies to me is that actually maybe, and I think that this is pretty visible with cis men's responses to this, it kind of feels like everybody actually would maybe be more open to being submissive if they could shake off some of their conventional ideas about what gender is. The idea would be that non-cis people there, having shed some of those ideas, are therefore more open to exploring what their real desires are, right?
I think that's true. I also just think that like the Overton window is just like
Hmm.
it had moved so far towards women are independent and they want to create their own path in life and their own sexual experience and this, that, and the other thing. And they do want to do that, but there are also constraints around that from the ways that they feel about sex and how they want to experience it. Not necessarily constantly, but like someone being extremely submissive is actually like a pretty significant component of their sex life. And I can talk to you about the male side of that too, because I have a friend of mine who he's like, my girlfriend always wants to have sex like this, and it's a big burden on me.
Hmm.
Like it's a lot because like I don't necessarily
Sure.
want to have sex like that, and I feel it's very performative and it's kind of draining on me. That was like really interesting to me. I was like, oh yeah, I can see the other side of that. And so, finding someone that you're sexually compatible with in the ways that they need things, much like we've talked about, needing different types of support is a big deal as well.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a high degree of self-knowledge that's required for this as well. Just to go back to what you were saying about dating too, with the checklists and things, there is something very flattening about that. I think kind of solipsistic, unimaginative, and ultimately irrational to approaching other people this way, as ticking certain boxes or not doing so. I talked about her before, but Amia Srinivasan talks about this, and she says the ability to be brought up short and be surprised by other people is actually ethically fundamental, and that's a really integral part of the human experience. Well, we really need to know ourselves there, because we imagine that we know what we want and what we need. When it comes to sex, we often assume that whatever we desire is kind of fundamental to us, and it can't really be investigated too much. It's just how we feel. And actually, I do think that it can be teased apart and looked at in more detail than that. Again, Amia Srinivasan, I really recommend, if people look up her book, The Right to Sex, she has something in there about the ethics of desire and the ways that obviously it was such an important piece of messaging in gay liberation to say that gay people are born this way, but that actually there's a downside to this idea, which is that we want to see desire as a black box, because otherwise we might open the door to conversion therapies and things like this. However, I do think we are kind of obliged to ask why we want what we want, to ask whether we're comfortable with what this person wants, and not just to think about it in terms of, well, I just have to do this, or this is the way that sex works between us, and treat it as an unchangeable, immutable thing.
So let's start at the most basic, which I think is an area that men fail so badly in historically, unless you have a particular kind of brain chemistry and archetype. When I'm thinking about all this stuff, like the most basic is a kiss.
Hmm.
And honestly, like somebody who is a great kisser, it's wild, like so crazy. It changes the experience. And someone who is not a great kisser that you're kissing with, or not a compatible kisser, I'll say it in that way, also completely changes your experience. And most guys don't think about that, but like that's actually like that opens the door to everything else. It is the precursor for it. And oh my God, like a couple of years ago, I remember lots of women's podcasts arguing about their response to a man asking if they could kiss them.
Hmm.
And I'm so having come back into the space and learning about consent, I will always ask. And actually, I used to ask before. And from the moment that I was a teenager, I wrote it in like a story that I was like goofing around with or something. Very embarrassing sets of stories that I used to write. Like, yeah, can I kiss you? Because I think that that's always been important. And getting permission also avoids any sort of awkwardness. The question is not particularly awkward. You're like, oh, okay, we don't have to worry about that. But sometimes they're like, yeah, can I hug you? And that's okay. That's fine. Like you're kind of finding out information. Again, your time is so valuable. So finding out information early, super, super useful. Finding out if somebody's a compatible kisser, like amazing stuff because it opens up everything else. And again, women are much more of a process than men. And so like this might be the start of the process. So that's part of it. And then also just like physical touch. And we will talk about love languages because I think love languages are so important. And this was a thing
Hmm.
that like we're gonna have whole episodes on this because this was a thing that changed all of my life and also made me regret things about my past life. Like it was like the world had been giving a syllabus in class and I missed all of the first sort of like 4 months of this 5 month class. And I was like, fuck, if I had the readings, like I would have treated
Mm.
everything different. And so like I had to do lots of research on attachment style, but then particularly on love languages. And love language and physical touch, like physical touch doesn't mean fucking, guys. Like it doesn't. It can mean like just the most basic affection. But somebody's neck, somebody's ears, somebody's wrists, and like the insides of their forearms, the tops of their jeans or something. Just being able to touch somebody in a comfortable way and
Hmm.
relaxed about it totally changes your interaction. And so between kissing and between like basic physical touch, like you will get a set of responses that teach you about everything else that you might want to do later. And without those, like usually they don't happen. Or if they do happen, like the sex takes much longer to figure out and often it's stunted and confused and things like that. So we're talking about sex, but the reality is like these are the building blocks to all of that, and none of that has changed. So that those things were the same from before. And if you're in tune with this, if you learn to become a better kisser, I don't know how you practice this, but like you might actually ask, like, "Hey, I kiss like this, but how would you like to be kissed?"
Mm.
Right? Like that's actually a really useful question for somebody you're already in a relationship with. And some like I don't want to get into details because that's going to get me in trouble, but I find it fascinating. And I have found in myself that if I'm not being kissed in a particular way, like I never have performative anxiety about almost anything, but like I will feel like, oh, that person's not into me because they don't know how to
Mm.
kiss me.
Sure.
And that's like pretty significant. And it might be significant for you. Like as a man, you're like, oh, what do I need? And
Mm.
some amount of tongue and lips and like slowness, really, really useful. And you should explore. Exploring is the best thing in the world.
Well, and you're right. It's a basic way of showing somebody that you're meeting their needs. It's interesting as well, I think, to talk about these different kinds of physical touch because for a lot of men, they need to realize as well that physical touch is not a preamble to sex. It can be, but it can also be an end in itself. So all this kind of physical touch, learning these methods of affection is really important to show your partner that you're attracted to them and invested in them, but that you're not necessarily just out to sort of get something from them.
I'm
Because
not only interested in you for sex. I'm interested in you because I like touching you and spending time with you.
Mhm.
At Christmas time, I talked about massage guns, and I was like, look, if you have a partner and you want, like, first of all, if you like massage at all, massage guns are amazing, and they're not even that expensive these days. Um, Using the massage gun on each other for like 15 to 20 minutes, like post workout potentially, but usually before bed. First of all, it changes your sleep, and sleep is one of the most important things in your life. If you don't know this, we'll talk about that at some point. Like sleep is a huge game changer, but it also gives you a situation where, like, you don't have to be an expert in massage. I learned to do massage because, like, I thought that was an interesting thing to do, and I love it. But massage guns make it easy for somebody who isn't familiar with it to still give you a lot of the effects of massage, in some cases more so. And you create that 15 or 20 minutes where you can chat. You just sort of have your own time.
Mm.
You don't have to have anything on. You're giving them an active service in that, like, you're helping them loosen up, creating better sleep. And you're also creating these moments of intimacy that can lead towards actual sexual intimacy. But intimacy does not have to mean sex.
Mm.
Intimacy just means like shared wonderful experience that's, often quiet and between the two of you. I'm sure there's a better definition for it. And so the massage gun creates all of these elements that deliver that in ways that you might not know. And so when we talked in one of the episodes about better friendships and how do we create these situations that create better moments for yourself, create more friendships, more things, this is one type of thing that can create better intimacy for yourself as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And something you were saying before as well really struck me, where we're talking about love languages and kind of getting to know another person. And I think with sex, with expressions of love, a really good way to approach it, if you can, is to see the disagreements you have or the moments of rupture in your relationship as learning points. I try and think of it as when I speak French and I get to the point where I can't express something. And I feel stupid, I feel annoyed, I hate it. But what it shows me is the gap in my knowledge. And so I now know what I need to do. And so if you have these moments with a partner where it feels like, where you think the sex wasn't quite doing it for me, or oh, I felt like it wasn't quite doing it for them, or there was a moment in your relationship generally where it felt like you were speaking different languages, that's a really good place to focus your energies, because what you're seeing there is the point of disconnection between you. So yeah, if you feel like the kissing is never quite right, our tempo's different, blah, 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 these are really good places to actively try and improve rather than just hoping that it will over
Absolutely.
time, as we
Yeah,
said
because
previously.
it doesn't happen. And women often, talk about how they're trying to change men. Like you want to change each other for the better, so you better satisfy your needs. And we talk about physical touch. Physical touch is this huge thing, just massive thing. We men often sort of collapse it as you talk about into sex,
Hmm.
and it is so much bigger than that. It's just sitting on the couch and your girlfriend like putting her feet over you. You guys are somebody's reading a book. You're both watching a TV show, and you just like rub her feet or rub her calves. That's just fucking amazing. Like these are all these instances where you can create a bigger degree of closeness between the two of you and create a much
Yeah.
deeper bond. But the other thing, like even in sex, is like this huge category that very rarely gets talked about now. And we haven't. I was starting with the basics of how you should approach things because often men get hyper focused sex reproduction, right? That's like
Hmm.
so we just all right, this is the way, go find the thing. But the reality is like it's so much more open and diverse and interesting. And so coming back into the space of dating and relationships, I was like, all right, what are people interested in? I'm just going to start to ask. I'm going to ask in a really open, vulnerable way. I will tell my story about how, yeah, I got out of this relationship a while ago, and now I'm very curious about what the world has to offer. And people were often like very open and responsive about it. And like that's so exciting. And then when you learn about other people's stuff and you become more educated about things, then with future partners, if you have future partners, then you can be like, oh yeah, I learned this from there, or this from there, or this from there. Taylor Tomlinson has a fantastic routine about this though, where she she's talking about your past partners and how like you often have to pretend that you didn't learn the things that you liked from anybody else. You just
Hmm.
inherently knew it.
Sure.
But then you meet a new partner and you're like, just do it like Dave did. Look, I can get him on the phone if you need better advice on this. And like you can't do that. But like this is, we're gonna talk about honesty and these radical conversations, but this is so important to just move forward faster, right? Like, would you like to have better sex tomorrow? The key to that is to having discussions with your sexual partners and learning to be open about what they're interested in.
Hmm. So, given all that, you've instituted this into your practice. You're now talking to people. You're asking them questions early on. You're thinking about what you like. You're exposed to a new world of kink or sexual practice. How then have you seen your sexual identity change? Because I think it's quite surprising to learn the ways that it can, and maybe some things that are a little bit more rigid.
Oh, that's funny. Nice segue right there.
You're welcome.
uh, God, where to even start? So for men, if you are not interested in performing oral on your partner, you're an idiot and you need to fix that. Like you're just wrong, and you're wrong in like a bazillion ways. And you can learn how to do this better, and you should be soft and gentle about it at the start. But like there's lots of resources for you to do this. You need to fix that about yourself. I thankfully I've always liked to give oral, but it's just like it's a huge game changer. Like
Hmm.
and often this is we talk about double standards a lot. The double standards. Would you like to receive a blowjob? Most guys are like, fuck yeah, that's like one of the best things in the world. Like, okay, would you like to go down on your partner and sort of give them oral to satisfaction, to orgasm. And they're like, no, 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 this is wrong. Like, again, you can't have this level of double standard inside of your relationship and have it be a fully reciprocal relationship. And so, like, starting with oral is like such a good thing. And often, like, I will start. Like, some guys are like, oh, I want this first. I'm like, no, no, let me take the first steps. Partly because it's also physical touch. I enjoy it. The insides of the thighs are like wonderfully sensitive and receptive. So like that's like a tactical thing for guys that we're talking about that I've kind of always been aware. But then the other parts of it are just like, whoa. So linking back to the Ella girl thing about submissiveness, like, I'd never thought about this before. Like, I was aware of
Hmm.
kink.com and stuff like that, but it was never part of something that I particularly pursued. Like, there are these times where, like, this is my beloved partner. I treat them as an equal, blah, 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 blah. And
Hmm.
like, there are
Hmm.
certain circumstances where they do not want to be treated as an equal in the bedroom, or with certain archetypes. And actually, I dated somebody who was very successful woman, and she's like, yeah, I'm submissive nowhere except the bedroom. And there, it's the only way that I respond. I was like, wow, fascinating. That's like so freaky, because you're here, like, you can go toe to toe with me on every single thing. You're incredibly brilliant. But like, there, she's like, yep, I've got it all figured out. Like, I like the whole diversity of stuff, but I like to be submissive.
Hmm.
And I was like, this is wild. And so I started pulling on these threads and I started asking questions about it. And so my own sexual identity there was to just be like, okay, like, I like giving people pleasure. That's sort of the way that I work. I like happiness. I like pleasure. I like optimism. I like positivity. And so, like, oral is one way you give pleasure. Toys are another way. And like, incorporating toys in your sex life is great. Like, do not feel offended if you cannot give your girlfriend an orgasm, especially if she can have orgasms from using toys with you or without you. That's great, because all you want her to do is be happy and have as many orgasms in her life as she wants. Like, honestly, like, that's the fucking right way to do it. There's no like quid pro quo here or anything. And like, they can chain, right? They can have many orgasms. Sometimes you get
Sure.
cascades where they have like hours long periods of time where they're basically in orgasm phase, and you're like, I'm so jealous. But so before, I was like kind of interested, and then I did the research and I was like, okay, what are the best types of toys to start to use? And there are different types of toys, and there's like the things that do the sonic sort of clitoral suction types things, and then there's obviously the wands. And like, if you don't have wands, figure out the wands. Those are great. We should really get some think about business perspective. I'm like, we need to start to get affiliate links to toys.
Never not founding.
True. Yeah, and obviously you have rabbits and you have all sorts of different things. And men just think of like dildos, but the reality is that the clitoris is probably the most important thing that's involved there. Anyway, this is a long story about I started to date a couple of women, and somebody who had a good job where she ran like social media for some healthcare companies is pretty intense. And she was able to clearly articulate, she's like, I would like you to restrain me, blindfold me, and then give me orgasms, and then have your way with me. And I'm like, all right, cool. I can volunteer for that. That sounds great. And then this sort of like set off a series of things where like I would have discussions about like, what are you most interested in, or like, what's your fantasy? Because like, I'm cool with that. Like, let's find these things out. I'm open to exploring the world as it exists. And so it happened a lot, like a lot. I wasn't like, I want to do this. I'm like, let me ask you open-ended questions and see what your responses are. And you find out that women, many women, 40% apparently, according to Ella, are like extremely submissive, and they have fantasies about this. And you read women's literature, you read the
Hmm.
romanticy stuff, and it is like this. They like, women that are wanting to be ravaged. This is one of the most popular book formats in the whole fucking world now. It's not just Fabio on the front of a romance book where they have like somewhat normie, not so steamy sex 3 or 4 times a book, and like, they sell it for $1.50. Like, these are like real stories that have really steamy, kind of kinky sex sometimes. And like, it's really popular. 50 Shades of Grey is really popular for reasons. And so I found that, holy shit, like, completely surprising. And it caused me to learn some things about myself and to adjust how I approach sex.
Yeah, I think the thing about the romantasy stuff, romance literature and porn, is that they give two kind of fake perspectives. Okay, so they can be useful in some ways because they're an insight into other people's desires. But obviously with porn, the idea often tends to be male to female porn, is she's going to have a great time whatever I do, and she just wants to kind of give the man like whatever he wants, and that's how sex works. And then a lot of the romance stuff is the fantasy of the hyper competent man who knows immediately what you want and just delivers it without having to have the conversation. And so I've had clients, you know, where we've had conversations along these lines, whether it's them or their partner or whatever, where there's this sense of they should just know, they should just be able to do it.
Oh yeah,
And
they should just know is like it's the
it's an
bane of my
enormous problem.
existence.
It's an enormous problem. There's absolutely no world in which you will be able to be the perfect sexual partner to your partner through all phases of life. It's going to change. Physical needs are going to change. Loads of stuff, even just like your flexibility. You know, these are factors. And as a result, you have to have an open line of communication on this so that the sex life can adapt.
Check in with your partner regularly. It's not just about safe words. It's like, hey, are you comfortable? Are you enjoying this? Like, is this good for you? After you're done, like, hey, did you enjoy that? Is there anything that I could do better next time? Like, these are great, right? Because you'd like to have sex next time. And if you completely fucked it up, like at least if you're checking in with her and she's like, yeah, so none of that worked for me. Like, we need to do it this way. And then maybe you get out of the way. You're like, okay, so can you take control next time? And maybe we'll do it that way. So what I found out from a lot of this is that like I'm kind of a pleasure dom is what they call it, which I didn't expect.
Okay.
Like I happily fit that role. Like everybody's happy, like some level of I'm comfortable with restraints and things like that. But there are also things that I got uncomfortable with. So
Okay.
I didn't realize for some people that spanking is like hot unto itself. And so like when you get into the BDSM space, like that's where like I have limits. I have some level of discomfort around some elements of it. Now, it's not that I'm not okay with it. And especially if I understand my partner and like we're really in tune, then that's awesome. But like there's just elements of like pain play that like I don't get. And so like I find that to be a little bit confusing. But I talked to a former model that like dated me for a little bit, and she was like, I just like to be spanked. It's hot. I don't know why. It just
Hmm.
is. And I'm like, oh wow, that's just really intriguing. Yeah. And then there's like all sorts of things you have to do safely. And like guys that are over ambitious and overexcited about stuff, like you've got to be really careful about things. Like choking is a thing that some people enjoy, but there's a
Yeah.
right way and there are many, many wrong ways. And I did mixed martial arts for 5 years. So like I understand a lot of the ways to do this wrong. No, I'm just saying, like I understand about choking. Like I've been choked out before. Like I know what this is like.
Literal rear naked chokehold. Yeah, sure. I mean, there are definitely areas where you need to make sure that you know what you're doing. So do you...
Hang on, I have one more that
Okay,
like
okay.
was the hard like I can't do this, which is
Hmm.
like so
I think I
pleasure
know where
dom
this is.
pleasure dom okay, but there was someone that I met that was very into daddy dom little girl. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Hmm.
Do you want to describe what it is for other people?
No. Like, I think it's best that you describe how it went with this particular person, because it can actually take quite a few forms, as I
Mm.
understand it.
So her dress wasn't like, little girl like, and that might have been a clue. But in the bedroom, she wanted to use a little girl voice and talk to me in little girl ways, and she wanted to act like I was a father figure. And I'm like, this is just a lot. And she was really attractive, but so like I'm trying to get on board with this. You're like, yeah, I'm super interested in you, and then you're like, oh, there's a lot of mental load inside of this. And in fact, like it got to the point where I'm like, we were not in the bedroom, and I was like, do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about like your relationship to your dad and this and that? And like it's like I'm pretty sure that you need therapy, and like you should really really talk to somebody, not to dissuade you from this might be the way that you want to go about like having sex. Is totally cool. It's too much for me. I can't really sort of enact that role for you because like
Hmm.
I'm not happy with it. And occasionally you'll run across that too. Like people that need extreme pain play where you're just like, "Ooh, that's too much. I can't do that to a partner that I'm interested in." And some people are fine with it, but like that's not really my thing. And so yeah, you by exploring the world and interacting with other people's sexualities, it was helping me learn about my own and
Yes.
also about what's on offer there. And I found that to be wonderful, and I'm still learning a lot. And we can talk more about some of that stuff in a second. But you had more things you wanted to say. I just wanted to get that story out there where there are limits to like the exploration.
No, I think it was interesting that you initially kind of wanted to see if you could go along with it. Like it's there's a positive part of that, which I think you're talking about the exploratory mindset, but also maybe there was a bit of a compulsion in you to think it's my job to facilitate a satisfying sexual interaction for her as
I'm
far as I
just
can, and
I'm just fucking customer service here.
yeah, and eventually then it butts up against something. But even for somebody, I'm saying, who has this attitude of I'm thinking about what I want, I'm exploring, there still was a little bit of unknown in there that you weren't quite aware of until it came up against this thing. I think quite often when we think of interrogating our desires, we imagine that it's going to be straightforward. We imagine it's going to be like, I line up 10 people in front of you and I say who's the hottest, and it'll be very easy. And in reality, it's much more like deciding what you want to eat tonight. It's difficult. It's not always simple, and you're not always immediately aware of what it is that you want and don't want.
Yeah, and my experience in that in particular is like, yeah, physical attractiveness is a small component, but it actually is a small component. And that sexual compatibility is part of it. And how do you like to do things? And are you interested in this person beyond
Mm.
like a first date? We'll talk more about the dating stuff. Like I've been on probably over 200 first dates since I came out of my divorce. I did have like a nice
Wow.
long well, I kind of dated like in bulk for a bit.
It's a good thing you sold your company, Ted. Jesus Christ.
It's expensive if you take on the
Yeah.
yeah. But out of 200, like maybe the first 100, like nobody that I was interested in
Mm.
having a long-term relationship with. And
Mm.
then out of the next 100, probably 3 or 4 because I got better at filtering. Maybe I was a little more open to it, but I don't think so. I think that I would have recognized those people that I was excited about before. And then obviously, are they excited to interact with you is a big component too. I think the other thing that like for men is terrifying. And like for most men this is, and you shouldn't be, is male butt play. Like
Okay.
that is a thing that like you're like, oh god. And that's the response to potentially being gay, right? Like anything that's gay, like we've been conditioned, especially as older men, to like reject. But it's Stifler, right? And fucking American Pie from the earliest days, they're teaching you about prostate massage, and you're like, hmm, interesting. And I think actually when American Pie came out, you didn't have any real information about prostate massage. It was actually really hard
Mm.
to find. Now you find a lot more about it. That was something where, on my part, I had a partner that was interested in it, and I had to really work on myself to becoming potentially okay with it, and then potentially find a process to be able to explore that with them. And it turned out to be an occasional thing that I might be interested in and very rewarding when I was, but it was fucking scary at the start. And the reality is it's kind of awesome, and maybe you might be really into it at the right times. But because we had these huge walls and this huge
Mm.
terror about anything that might be gay, which you shouldn't. Again, this is it's fine. Like you should just treat it as exploring your sexuality and not in the connotations that exist over there. Like just explore your sexuality, explore the other person's sexuality in a positive, curious, affectionate way.
Mm. And I think also by yourself. So this is something that you notice in often the ways that women will talk about masturbation versus the way men will. Women will talk about being turned on by their own bodies.
Yeah.
And for men, they will talk about masturbation in a much more functional way. Oh, well, I have to do it or I can't concentrate or can't sleep or something. And there's no sensuality to it. And to some degree, that's because, broadly speaking, it does seem that, for men, arousal is more mechanical. And for women, there is more of an cerebral element. But also, if you see your body as something that could be erotic in itself, then it is easier to be open to using your body in different ways sexually.
And also to have confidence.
Yes,
Like
sure.
when you're confident, you exude a little more sexuality. You just are.
Hmm.
Like you walk through the world with your shoulders back and like, hey, like I'm pretty attractive, and that's great. You talked about women and masturbation, and like they have like whole courses about this, and use mirrors, and which areas of your body are most turned, because like nobody teaches you how to masturbate. Like you just kind of figure it out, but like
Hmm.
sometimes you don't figure it out right, and sometimes you have tons of guilt around it. It's just like endless amounts of things that are fucked up about this particular thing, depending on what culture you grew up in. And so a lot of what I have done is deprogramming that,
Yes.
which is super important. And it's literally the same way that I would go start a new business. Like deprogram all the shit that people know, go down to sort of first principles. How do we find out more about this? How do we learn about it? How do we get rid of like most people's knowledge and like explore things for ourselves, but then incorporate interesting elements like, the Ella stuff, or the, what people find most attractive. I don't find 21-year-olds attractive at all. I think that like they haven't done anything. We can't have real conversations. Like I know that at this point in my life, like I want to be able to do that. And often their sexual experience is so stunted that you're like, oh, this isn't good enough. Like it's not. You have
Sure.
you have a sexual experience with somebody who's older, who's much more experienced, because they were with other people, which is totally fine. They got their reps
Hmm.
in. It's great. Yeah, then you can have like a much more positive, warm, like, or just hot experience. And so that's kind of my thought process around it.
Yeah, so I think when people are starting to think about this stuff, that's a really good kind of principle, the idea of a naive sex life where you're willing to discard things that you think you know, and you're very willing to learn new stuff. But also I think, yeah, rethinking your relationship with your own body is a really good place to start. For a lot of people, their hang-ups about sex are nothing to do with the other person. They're entirely about themselves.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, it takes a long while before they get to that point. They think, well, I was turned on with that person, I wasn't turned on with that person. Sometimes it's entirely about them, you know? They were going through a period where they didn't feel good about themselves. So that
Yeah.
is also another piece of work that I think you really need to try and spend some time on here, because body image, if like Ted says, if you don't feel confident, you don't feel sexy. If you don't feel sexy, you are probably going to have a slightly more awkward and unsatisfying sexual interaction.
Same way for your partner. So making them feel sexy, making them
Hmm.
aware that you find them attractive, even if it's not sexual, is a big deal. Also, taking away the burden of physical touch always meaning sex means that you get in more physical touch situations, which might lead to sex. So it's actually a benefit to you to just be affectionate in general, in a physical way. Like somebody's cooking, like walk up, gently pat their butt, like, kiss the side of their neck. Right? It's just, there's so many ways to show affection that you should be doing in order to be a better potential partner to somebody that could lead to more sex. And then in the dating space, like it's a little bit about finding out information faster. So like, how do I know if she's into me? How do I know if she's responsive? And most of the time, I would say that like you can find out fairly easily, and you're also making them aware that you're interested in them. And usually if the conversation is a little bit sparkly, that's pretty obvious. But sometimes they're not in that spot. I'm Sometimes you walk through life and you're like, wow, I haven't even thought about sex in like 2 weeks. And like that's really, really unusual for a man. But occasionally I've been there where like so much
Sure.
stress and everything, like it's not
Yeah.
even on my radar. Women, I think, do that more often. Their cycle sort of drags them from place to place, but we haven't talked about men and interacting with women's cycles at all, but like that's a big thing too. You should be chill about their cycle. Like it's, yeah, like we'll talk about that in the future about being a better partner, because it's a big deal. So I noticed we haven't talked about you at all.
Huh?
Huh? Okay, cool.
No, I mean, like, well, look, I'm willing to some degree. I think because I think that sex is. I grew up in a very religious family, and it was like no sex before marriage, and so there was a lot of complicated feelings around it, a lot of shame around it, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out where I stood with that, or rather, it took me, becoming an adult basically for me for me to shed this stuff. I stopped being religious. Yeah, I don't really know what there is to say in a way. It's just that I approach it as I approach most things, which is this is a constant learning experience.
So
And
you met your wife at 24,
yeah,
and you are
yeah,
how old?
I'm 35.
So I suspect your sex life has changed significantly since the moment you met her until now. I'm not going to ask for details around it, but like I think that's interesting, right? That's a long relationship.
Yeah, and I think that you obviously have a honeymoon phase, but then you go through all sorts of different physical stages. So there was a long period there where I just hated my body in my 20s. My body, I felt like I've been overweight my entire life. I lost a load of weight and got in really good shape a couple of times in my life, but in my mid 20s, my relationship with sex was entirely defined by my relationship with my own body, and it had almost nothing to do with my wife. So that was something I had to work on by myself. And the more I worked on it by myself, the more it improved things. But a big part of it is There's something really heartening about it, because when I was young, before I got married, I kind of thought, what if I marry someone and then after 10 years I'm not attracted to them, or I stop, and you realize that actually if you practice being attracted to that person, through physical touch, through all kinds of intimacy, then that promotes more feelings of love and attraction. These things reinforce themselves, and also that you want a really, really broad understanding of what physical intimacy is, because there are going to be periods where it's not going to look the way that you thought it would look when you were 18 and you just wanted to have sex all day long. There are going to be periods, and I'm not just talking about me here, but there are all kinds of things, when there's PCOS and vaginismus and erectile dysfunction and just injuries, like all these sorts of things, pregnancy. There's a load of stuff which affects your ability to have sex in the way that you have previously conceived of sex. And so I would say that over time, I have a much better understanding of myself. I have a much better understanding, of course, of my wife. And our relationship has gone through lots of different stages where now we know that we are able to feel close to each other. We're able to have a satisfying, like, intimate life, regardless of what's going on around us. That's a very heartening thought.
I apologize to my ex that I got fat. For most of my life, I have been very fit.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up as a fat kid, and we I'm sure there's a whole episode about this type of stuff and like body dysmorphia and
Mm-hmm.
sort of men's relationships with their own body. Then I got skinny, and I didn't realize I was skinny. And then I did my mixed martial arts, and I was super ripped. I walked around like 220 at 6'2", and just like rocks of thighs and everything like that. And I still thought I was fat, and I've
Mm.
like almost no photos of that period of time. It's like it's embarrassing and frustrating for me because like I was probably beautiful and I didn't know it. I think the
Mm.
last couple of years are the first time the pandemic sort of triggered me to get back into shape, and then I was like, I feel so bad that like you've had to deal with fat me for such a long period of time, and she was very understanding and relaxed about it, but and the fact of the matter is that I heard about these people that they put in their vows for marriage that one of them is, I will keep myself in good shape for you because I want you to be attracted to me. And obviously you should do that for yourself, but we hear about people who let themselves go after they get married because they're not in the competitive space of looking for a mate. And the reality is, like, if you commit to keeping yourself attractive and like make that commitment to yourself and to your partner, that's actually super important, and it's something that gets lost for so many people. But I find it now. I'm like, oh god, that would have made a decent difference if I had just said, oh, I'd already made that commitment. I'm actually pretty good at commitments, so I'm going to go ahead and try and keep fitter even with everything else that's going on. I think that, as you say, if you want to sustain long-term relationship, you are going to change, your body's going to change, everything like that. But if you've put up front that, like, hey, I would like to continue for us both to be sexually attractive for as long as possible, like that's it's important.
Hmm. I mean, I get where you're coming from. I don't think that I particularly like that, because I think I don't really like yoking together attractiveness with thinness, especially as we know that people can be pretty fit and pretty fat, and people can be very slim and pretty
i'm
unfit.
I'm not saying that the definition is
No, I know,
strict
I know.
here.
Uh-huh. Well, that's the thing. I think, yeah, it's interesting because I would say also that I would want to expand that definition of, I'm going to take care of myself in order to be an
There.
attractive, good partner to you, right?
Yep.
Because you would also say, I'm going to work on my anger issues. I'm going to deal with my shit with my mum so that I can be a good partner to you. I'm going to deal with my laziness or my fear around being a father or whatever it might be. Yeah, this is a difficult one because I feel like there needs to be a whole episode about like body
Yeah.
image.
It's we absolutely should. I just found this interesting because I hadn't interacted with it before, and I was like, I think that it would have changed how I behaved if I found a way to structure the verbiage around it. And I felt bad after the fact because I was like, I got kind of fat, and like then as I lost weight, like it was like, oh wow, this is easier, and
Sure.
and
Hmm.
and you're less likely to throw your back out doing dumb stuff because you got less weight around.
That's true, but then the other side of it, of course, is that I think when I was at my fattest in my relationship, I think that the issue for my partner with attraction was not being attracted to me the way I looked, but it was being in a relationship with someone who fucking hated the way they looked.
There you
You
go.
know, that was really corrosive, I think, to the closeness between us. And that was when we were just kind of getting up and running. You know, there's that beginning bit in a relationship, or even in a marriage, where you've got your driver's license but you don't really know how to do it before you can like parallel park without looking. And so there's that bit at the beginning where we were figuring that stuff out. And looking back on it, that's the bit that I feel bad about, that I think I subjected you to being in a relationship with this person who carried around this black cloud around his own attractiveness, and ultimately, you know, cause a problem for the whole relationship.
Yeah. And sometimes you should be checking in on stuff. So you're like, look, we've parked that for ages, but like
Mm.
I had these sparks and like I want to just check in and think about that. And again, sometimes it's first principles, right? So it might be a good point to kind of wrap this, because I know we're on the long, but like we could talk about sex forever. Like we're men, and like once you start being open about talking about sex, like this just goes on forever, unlike your penis. And so there are these Esther Perel, which we will talk about endlessly. She talks about how often people have 2 or 3 marriages in their life, and they may not be official marriages, but they might be just like long-term relationships you have. Often you have one kind of starting in your mid to late 20s. You might have another one in your 30s or 40s, and then you have potentially another one that sees out your life. It depends on, you know, how condensed these things are. And she talks about sometimes the marriages are to the same person, but your
Yeah.
relationship has changed. And I found that fascinating. And that's also super conducive to think about in terms of sex. Like sometimes you find a thing, you're like, oh, I'd never thought about this before. Or actually, I was blocked from this before, but now I'm interested in it. And I would like to talk to you about exploring it and in an open, honest way. Because so many times we park things in marriage, and you're like, oh, this is just how we operate. This is our rhythm. This is our routine. This is this, this is that.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's like really useful to bring stuff back into it. And many times the person that you married in your 20s, when people are plastic and they're flexible, is not the person that is in their 30s or their 40s. And so revisiting these types of things on a somewhat regular basis is really important for the long-term health of your relationship. And it's not just
Mhm.
in terms of who you are, it's not just in terms of how you interact with each other emotionally, but sometimes it's in terms of interacting physically and bringing new things into the bedroom, new concepts into the bedroom in a safe, open, respectful way that might not have existed before, or you might have been scared of before.
Yeah, it often feels like the rubric of the relationship has been established, and that to do something like this would be to break the kind of covenant that you have with your partner.
We just stopped talking about things.
Yes,
Like, how
exactly.
often do you hear that?
We drifted apart. We stopped talking. We drifted apart. Every single couple who come to couples therapy will say the issue is communication, and they're right and they're wrong. But communication is kind of the thing that exacerbates the actual issue, which is normally a lack of closeness. And if you are communicating, then you can promote that closeness. And it's far less likely that you'll end up being these people who drifted apart. If you do end up separating, you're much more likely to separate as two people who came to the conclusion that we wanted different things and were able to part amicably, rather than this gradual kind of continental drift, which I do think is difficult, upsetting, and confusing for everybody.
I think that's a fantastic episode. We will talk about sex lots more. Hopefully, we've given you some nuggets to think about, and a different way to approach potential sex life as a young man that is getting involved in relationships in the world,
Mhm.
or as an older man who has established things, or might want to establish new things and think about the world in a totally new way. If you love the podcast, please, first of all, tell your friends. Like, we are going to grow via an army of you telling your friends that this is great, right? And tell your sisters, tell your moms. We're not just for men. Like, in
No.
fact, they're going to learn a lot by listening to us blather on about our own problems. So tell everybody you know that you love us. Like, subscribe, 5-star reviews, etc. Give us comments. Tell us
Please.
about future things you'd like to see us talk about, or hear us talk about, depending on where you're listening. And I think that wraps it up for Man Down today. Thank you for listening to us. Patrick, say goodbye to the nice people.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.